Zola Bennett thought the worst thing of her evening was missing her connecting flight. She had no idea that getting into the wrong car would unravel every truth she had ever been handed about her own life. The storm over O'Hare had turned the entire terminal into controlled chaos, delays cascading into cancellations, passengers piling up at every exit like debris after a flood. Zola's phone was at 4%, naturally, and her portable charger was packed in her checked bag like a cruel joke. She'd been standing outside the pickup zone for 25 minutes, watching car after car glide past without slowing, when she spotted it. A sleek black Genesis with a small white placard in the windscreen that read Riverfront. She leaned forward and squinted through the downpour. Her hotel was the Riverfront Suites, close enough for a woman whose shoes were now completely destroyed. "Thank God," she muttered, hauling open the back door and throwing herself inside. Her bag went into the trunk before the driver's side door had fully opened, clicking shut with a finality that meant she was committed whether she liked it or not. The leather interior was cool and immaculate against her soaked clothes. She pressed her back against the seat and exhaled like a woman pulled from the ocean. "I am so sorry to just dive in like that," she gasped, pushing wet braids off her face. "That rain is genuinely catastrophic out there. You have no idea how long I've been standing in it. You are a complete lifesaver, honestly." Silence. Then a voice, measured and cold. "Get out of my car." Zola's eyes opened fully. The man in the driver's seat was not a driver at all. Late 20s, sharp jaw, sharper eyes, currently regarding her with the specific expression reserved for things found where they should not be. His coat alone probably cost more than her rent. "I'm sorry?" "Get out." His voice was the temperature of marble. "This vehicle is not yours." Zola's stomach dropped toward the floor. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry. I genuinely thought the sign said Riverfront, and my hotel is the Riverfront Suites, so I assumed—" He had already turned fully in his seat. "Did someone put you up to this?" "What? No, this was an accident. I made an honest mistake." "An honest mistake." His laugh was short and completely without warmth. "That lands you specifically in my car, I wonder." Heat climbed up Zola's neck, embarrassment and fury arriving at the same moment. "Excuse me? I don't know who you are, I don't know your car, and I have no reason to be anywhere near you on purpose." "Right." His phone was already out. "I'm contacting security." "My bag is in your trunk." "Then that was a significant miscalculation on your part." Zola looked at this man, water still dripping from the ends of her braids onto his pristine upholstery, thought about her scholarship, her research, her mother back in Atlanta who had pressed $50 into her hand at the airport like it was a fortune, and felt something inside her go very still and very clear. "You know what?" she said, leaning forward. "Go ahead and call them. I'll be right here. And while we wait, I'll explain to them how a man in an expensive car accused a soaking wet PhD candidate of being some kind of professional car infiltrator because she misread a placard in the rain. I'm sure that'll make a wonderful story for everyone." His jaw tightened. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at the screen and she caught the message for just a second before he angled it away. "Without a formal engagement confirmed before the annual board assembly, control of the group transfers to your uncle. This is not a negotiation, say June." He stared at those words for a long moment. Then he looked at her, back at the screen. "What is your name?" he asked. "Why?" "Just answer." "Zola. Zola Bennett." "You're a student?" "PhD candidate, University of Chicago, Cultural Anthropology." He studied her the way someone studies a document they need to memorize. "And your financial situation?" "Excuse me? I assume, given your program, that you are not independently wealthy." Zola's spine went rigid. "I assume, given your attitude, that you have never once had to be." Something moved in his expression, not quite softening, but a crack in the surface. "What if I offered you $20,000? Zola blinked. "I'm sorry?" "20,000. 1 week of your time. You pose as my girlfriend, convince my father the relationship is serious enough to satisfy his board requirements, and then we conclude the arrangement and go our separate ways permanently. You're describing paying me to deceive your family. I'm describing a mutually beneficial transaction. His voice dropped slightly. My father has been manufacturing reasons to hand control of our company to my uncle for the better part of a year. If I arrive with a serious relationship, it satisfies the terms of a family agreement and buys me time to challenge the arrangement through legitimate channels. So you need a fake girlfriend to outmaneuver your father. That is what you're proposing right now. Do you have an alternative suggestion? Zola should have asked for her bag and walked into that rain without a back glance. She thought instead about her student loans, about the unpaid fellowship she had turned down twice because she couldn't afford the cost of living in the city it was based in, about her mother working back-to-back shifts at the hospital and insisting she was fine every single time Zola called. Before any rational thought could intervene, she heard herself say, 25,000. His expression shifted. I said 20. I heard you, and I'm Zane 25. If you're asking me to spend a week lying to your family, I'm pricing accordingly. Something that was almost a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. You are either remarkably confident or remarkably reckless. Probably both. She crossed her arms. So do we have an agreement or not? He extended his hand across the center console. Se-Jun Lim. And yes. His grip was firm and warm in a way that contradicted everything else about him. Zola shook it and told herself firmly that her pulse had jumped because of the cold. 1 week, she said, then we never cross paths again. Agreed, he said, his voice returning to its default temperature. Believe me, the feeling is mutual. As the actual driver returned and they pulled away from the terminal into rain-soaked Chicago streets, Zola stared out at the blurred city lights and wondered what she had just walked into. She had come here for a research conference, to present her dissertation chapter, to build her academic career into something real. She had not come to impersonate a billionaire heir's girlfriend. But $25,000 was $25,000. She had managed difficult situations before. How complicated could 1 week possibly get? If Zola had known what that week was going to cost her, not in time or energy, but in every certainty she had ever held about who she was, she might have stood in that rain until she dissolved completely. But she didn't know yet, so she settled back into the leather seat and let Se-Jun Lim drive her toward a future she could not have dreamed up on her best day. If you're already gripped by Zola's very questionable decision-making, hit that subscribe button right now because this story is about to become something else entirely. Trust me, you are not prepared for what comes next. Se-Jun's apartment was in the Gold Coast neighborhood, which Zola knew from her neighborhood mapping research for a previous paper. What her research had not covered was how to behave when stepping into a space that felt less like somewhere a person lived and more like the concept of living. The windows ran from floor to ceiling and looked out over Lake Michigan. The furniture was precise, everything in shades of ivory and slate and dark wood, arranged with the kind of deliberateness that suggested an interior designer had been paid an extraordinary amount to make it look effortless. Your bag is in the second bedroom, Se-Jun said, not looking up from his phone. First family dinner is tomorrow evening, 7:30. The dress code is formal. I'm a PhD candidate, not a diplomat. My formal wear is a wrap dress I bought on clearance 2 years ago. He glanced up briefly. There is a wardrobe in your room. My assistant arranged some options in your size. That was fast. I compensate her accordingly. He returned to his phone. The cover story is that we met 8 months ago at an academic conference on cultural heritage and luxury tourism. You were presenting a paper. I was in attendance on behalf of our hospitality division. We began corresponding, and things developed from there. You have really committed to this. I do not do things incompletely, Miss Bennett. Zola. If I'm going to pretend to be your girlfriend, you should use my first name. His jaw shifted slightly. Fine, Zola. You can call me Se-Jun. She tested the name. So what is the actual goal here? I show up, act completely wrong for your world, and your father decides I'm unsuitable. That is the broad outline. He set his phone down and gave her his full attention for the first time, and Zola felt the weight of it. You show up and simply be yourself. That should accomplish a great deal. The words landed precisely where they were aimed. Zola felt the sting go all the way through. What exactly does that mean? My father's world values legacy and lineage, shared cultural background, family networks, a specific kind of polish that comes from a specific kind of upbringing. His voice was clinical the way a diagnosis is clinical. You are a graduate student from Atlanta. You are everything his ideal candidate is not. So I am the wrong kind of person. That is what you are telling me. I'm telling you that you are different, and different is exactly what this situation requires. Zola held his gaze and decided she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing that land. She had been underestimated by more impressive people than Seo Jun Lim. Fine, she said coolly. I'll be myself. But if your father is even half as unpleasant as you're implying, don't expect me to absorb whatever he decides to throw my direction with a smile. Something moved briefly in Seo Jun's expression. I wouldn't expect you to. The guest room was unreasonably beautiful. Zola opened the wardrobe and found 8 dresses, all in her size, all selected with an eye for her coloring and build that suggested someone had thought about this carefully. Her phone buzzed. Her mother. Did you land okay, baby? How is Chicago treating you? Zola stared at the message. How exactly was she supposed to answer that? She had landed fine. She had also accidentally occupied a billionaire's car and agreed to perform a fictional romantic relationship for money. Her mother would have opinions about that. Landed safe, she typed. Conference starts tomorrow. Miss you already. She sent it before she could start revising. Lying to her mother sat badly, but the alternative was a conversation she didn't have the bandwidth for tonight. That night, Zola lay in the most comfortable bed she had ever occupied and stared at the ceiling while Chicago glittered outside the window. This wasn't her world. She was aware of that in every surface and silence. But $25,000 was real money. Money that could change the actual shape of her life. She just needed to survive 7 days. The next morning, Seo Jun was gone before she woke. A note on the kitchen counter in angular, certain handwriting. Car comes at 7:15 tomorrow. Be ready. The family arrives at 7:30 sharp. Zola read the note twice, set it down, and went to find coffee. She spent the day grounding herself in the familiar, walking the lakefront, making notes for her dissertation revisions, sitting in a coffee shop and reminding herself she was still herself regardless of what building she was sleeping in. At 7:15 exactly, a black car appeared outside. The driver, a quiet man named Mr. Cho with steady eyes and impeccable manners, opened her door. Miss Bennett, Mr. Lim asked me to bring you to the restaurant. At least someone in this orbit had remembered that courtesy existed. The restaurant was in River North, the kind of place with no prices on the menu and lighting calibrated to make everyone look like a painting. Seo Jun was waiting at the entrance, wearing a suit that made everything else in the room look approximate. He looked her over once, professionally, and gave a single nod. The dress is correct. I want to go on record saying that is an extremely strange compliment. Remember, 8 months, cultural heritage tourism, you were presenting a paper. Keep the details consistent and don't volunteer information. Got it. I'm the unsuitable American girlfriend and I should stay in my lane. I didn't say unsuitable. You communicated it fairly clearly. He looked at her. His father would arrive in 10 minutes. His name is Chairman Lim. Address him that way unless corrected. Don't contradict him directly in front of others. Seo Jun, she kept her voice even. I have a doctorate in cultural dynamics, and I have been navigating rooms full of people who didn't think I belonged there since I was 17. I know how to conduct myself at a dinner table. He held his gaze for a moment, then said nothing, which felt, coming from him, like an apology.
The door opened. A woman in her mid-60s entered first, wearing a deep blue hanbok, her expression warm and immediately curious. She found Zola before she found anyone else. "Oh, you must be Seo Jun's companion. I'm Mrs. Back. I manage the private dining arrangements here." She smiled with the warmth of someone who genuinely enjoyed people. "Seo Jun didn't tell me he was bringing anyone so lovely." "I didn't tell you anything, Mrs. Back, because this is a private dinner." "Private, yes, yes. I only came to confirm the tea service for the chairman. You know how particular he is about his preparation." She glanced at Zola again while adjusting something on the sideboard, and for a moment their eyes held. Something moved across Mrs. Back's face that Zola couldn't name, familiarity without recognition. She looked away first. "The chairman is arriving now," Mrs. Back said softly. She moved toward the door and looked back at Zola once more, her expression quietly troubled. "Are you ready?" Seo Jun asked. "As I'm going to be," Zola said. "Then it begins." Chairman Lim entered, and the room reorganized itself around him without anyone meaning for it to. He was tall and silver-haired, with the particular stillness of someone who had not needed to raise his voice in decades. His eyes swept across Zola like you sweep a room when you're looking for something specific and want to appear as though you are not.
"Father." Sejun's voice was controlled and careful. "This is Zola Bennett." "Zola, my father, Chairman Lim." "Chairman Lim," Zola said, extending her hand steadily despite the way her heartbeat had relocated to her throat. "It's a pleasure." He shook her hand with the grip of someone taking a measurement. "Miss Bennett, Sejun tells me you study cultural anthropology." "Yes, sir. University of Chicago. And you met my son at a conference?" His tone made the word conference into a small test. Zola met his gaze without blinking. "I was presenting a paper on cultural preservation practices in luxury hospitality." Sejun had some very pointed questions during the discussion period afterward. We had coffee, and the conversation continued from there. It has been continuing for some time now. "Continuing," Chairman Lim repeated, as though he was cataloging the word for later examination. "Yes." They were seated. The meal began. And the real dinner, Zola understood, was not the food. It was a performance dressed as a meal. The courses arrived one after another, each more beautifully composed than the last, and Zola watched Sejun from her periphery and mirrored his posture, the way he held his utensils, the angle of his glass. Chairman Lim watched her the way a person watches a document they don't entirely trust. "Miss Bennett, your family, what do your parents do?" Zola set down her fork with deliberate calm. "My mother is a registered nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. My father passed away when I was young." She paused. "My mother raised me on her own." "I see." The dismissal in his voice was surgical. "My mother has worked night shifts for 17 years, Zola said evenly. "She put me through Howard University on a combination of academic scholarships and the kind of sacrifice that doesn't really have a monetary value. Howard University, and now Chicago. Quite a path. I work for what I have. I've never been in a position to do otherwise." "Admirable," Chairman Lim said, in a tone that suggested he was still making up his mind about what exactly it was. He turned to Sejun. 8 months, you said." "Yes." Sejun's voice was smooth. "We kept it quiet. Zola wasn't comfortable with the attention that came with my family's profile. Prudent of her." His eyes came back to Zola. "Tell me what you know about the hospitality sector." This, at least, was ground Zola had actually studied. "The most significant shift in luxury hospitality right now isn't in amenities or architecture," she said. "It's in authenticity. Travelers with the resources to go anywhere are no longer impressed by generic opulence. They want to feel the actual culture of a place, not a sanitized version of it packaged for their comfort. The brands that will define the next decade are the ones building genuine cultural exchange into their model, not just hanging local art in the lobby." Chairman Lim's expression shifted. He had not expected that. "You've looked at our properties?" I've studied major luxury chains as part of my research. Lim Group's approach to architectural heritage elements is genuinely impressive. There is room to go deeper, but the foundation is stronger than most. The whole table went still. Chairman Lim set down his chopsticks. And you think a graduate student in cultural anthropology is qualified to make that assessment? I think research is research regardless of who presents it. I can send you the paper if you'd like to evaluate the methodology directly. Silence stretched across the table like something waiting to break. Se-jun had gone completely still, his face giving nothing away. Chairman Lim looked at Zola for a long moment. Then he made a short, sharp sound that might, from another man, have been a laugh. "You are not what I was anticipating." "So I've been told," Zola said. He stood, signaling that the meal was over. "Miss Bennett, I'll see you at the shareholder reception next Saturday." "The reception?" Se-jun said, his voice taking on an edge. "Father, I haven't agreed. You're introducing your girlfriend to the family. Surely the shareholders deserve the same courtesy, unless this relationship is less substantial than you've represented." It wasn't a question. Se-jun's jaw worked. "Of course I'll bring her," he said flatly. "Excellent. My assistant will send you the details." He nodded once to Zola. "Good evening," and he left, and the room exhaled. Se-jun stood immediately and walked to the window, his back to her, his posture rigid. "That wasn't the plan," he said quietly. "The reception, that wasn't supposed to be part of this." "What happens at the reception?" 800 people, press, shareholders, every family alliance my father has spent 30 years cultivating. He turned, and she saw something real in his expression for the first time. He's making a statement. If we arrive together publicly, it validates everything. And if we fail, if anyone reads through it, he'll know everything. Then we don't fail. Se-jun laughed without humor. "These people are professionals at this. They will examine everything about you, where you're from, how you're educated, who your family is. They will find every seam in the story and pull. Then we make the story seamless." Zola stood, her own frustration rising. "You hired me to do a specific job, and I am doing it. Your father just told me he respected my analysis, which is more than you've offered since I got in your car. Every conversation we've had has been about how I don't belong, how I'm the wrong kind of person, how my very existence is the problem you're trying to use. And yet, I survived that dinner. I more than survived it. So perhaps the issue here isn't me." She turned toward the door. "Wait." His voice stopped her. She turned slowly. He was still by the window, but his shoulders had changed, dropped slightly, like something had come down. "I have been treating you badly since the airport, since the moment you got in my car. I've been taking every suspicion my father has built into me and directing it at you, which is both unfair and wrong. I acknowledge that." Zola waited. "My father has a way of making me distrust everyone's motives. He makes me assume that every person who approaches me wants something. I defaulted to that with you when you were simply someone who made an honest mistake and got pulled into my problem. I'm exploiting your financial situation, and I've been making it worse by treating you like a suspect." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry." She wanted to hold the anger. It was easier than acknowledging the exhaustion underneath his voice, the genuine weariness of someone performing strength long past the point of having any left. "For what it's worth," she said, "your questions after my hypothetical presentation would have been good ones. You clearly understand the industry well." He blinked. "Are you trying to be kind right now?" "I'm trying to make this survivable. We have a reception to get through now, which means we can't keep treating each other like the opponent. You've been very good at keeping people at a distance, I can tell. How long has it been working for you?" A pause. "Long enough that I've forgotten what the alternative looks like." "Then it's lucky for you," Zola said, "that I am professionally curious about human connection. It is my entire field of study." He looked at her for a moment, then something that was close to a real smile crossed his face. "That sounds like a threat. Get used to it. You hired me for a week. You're committed now." He pulled out his phone. "The reception changes the parameters significantly. I'll increase the payment to $35,000.
Zola's breath left her body. Say June, it's appropriate for what I'm asking. He met her eyes. But I need to know you're fully committed, because if we do this publicly, there is no exit halfway through. Zola thought about the loans, about her mother, about the unpaid fellowship, about the dissertation she needed 2 more years to finish.
$35,000 was a different kind of life. But looking at him, at the way hope and exhaustion were fighting each other quietly in his expression, she understood that something had already shifted, and it wasn't only about the money anymore. "I'm in," she said, "all the way. Then we start properly tomorrow. We need to build something that can hold up under genuine scrutiny." He hesitated. "We need to be comfortable with each other, with the way couples actually move around each other, the way they look at each other." The word look sent something unexpected through Zola's chest. She cataloged it and set it aside. "This is a transaction. That is all." "Fine," she said. "Tomorrow we practice being people who actually like each other." She headed for the door. "See you, June." She paused with her hand on the frame. "For what it's worth, you're not as impossible as you've been trying to appear." She left before he could respond. In the hallway on the way back, she stared at the city lights on the water and wondered at herself. In the hallway outside her guest room, she found Mrs. Beck waiting with an expression that made Zola's stomach drop before a word was spoken. "Miss Bennett, could I trouble you for a moment?" "Of course, what is it?" Mrs. Beck looked down the hallway and then lowered her voice to something barely above breath. "The birthmark on your collarbone. I saw it during dinner, when your neckline shifted. It's shaped like a small crescent moon." Zola's hand went automatically to her left collarbone, where she had carried that mark since she could remember. "How do you know about it?" 18 years ago, Mrs. Beck said, her voice shaking. "I was a maternity nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. A baby girl was taken from the nursery, a newborn. The case was never solved. One of the identifying details in the medical report was a crescent moon-shaped birthmark on the left collarbone." The hallway felt as though it was slowly rotating. Zola put a hand against the wall. "What are you saying to me right now?" Mrs. Beck's eyes were full. "I'm saying," she whispered, "that I think you might be that child." Zola could not breathe. The expensive wallpaper pressed in from both sides. "That is impossible," she managed. "I have parents. I have a birth certificate. I have a whole life that has nothing to do with this." "Do you have hospital records?" Mrs. Beck's voice was soft, but it did not move. "From Northwestern Memorial, from the specific date you were born." Zola opened her mouth, closed it. She had never seen her hospital birth records. Her mother had always gone vague when she asked, said the paperwork had been misplaced in one of their moves, said it didn't matter. She was theirs. She was loved. The time Zola needed her birth documentation for a graduate school application, and her mother had been frantic for 3 days, finding alternatives. The way her father, before he died, had sometimes looked at her in unguarded moments with an expression she had read as simple love, but that she now, standing in this hallway, was rereading as something more complicated. "I need to sit down," Zola said. Mrs. Beck guided her into the guest room and sat beside her, her own hands trembling. "I could be mistaken," she said. "I pray I am. But this case stayed with me for 18 years. The mother, Diana Osei, she was a surgical resident at Northwestern, young, alone, remarkable. She gave birth by herself, and someone took that baby from the nursery before she could be discharged." A tear ran down Mrs. Beck's face. "I was on shift. I held that baby. I recorded the birthmark in my notes because she was so perfect, and I remember thinking, this child is going to be extraordinary. And then she was gone." "Why didn't you find her?" "I tried," Mrs. Beck said. "I gave a statement, I pushed the investigators, but the trail went completely cold. No witnesses, no footage. The person who took her knew exactly what they were doing." She pulled out her phone with unsteady hands and opened a news article from 18 years ago. "This is Diana Osei. This is the mother." Zola looked at the photograph.
A black woman in her late 20s, caught by a press camera outside the hospital, her face destroyed by a grief too large for a face to hold. High forehead, wide-set eyes, the particular way her mouth sat slightly open, like she was perpetually on the verge of saying the thing that would bring her daughter back. High forehead, wide-set eyes, the particular way her mouth sat slightly open, like she was perpetually on the verge of saying the thing that would bring her daughter back. Zola recognized the mouth. She saw it every morning. She was staring at her own future face. "No," she said, her voice breaking. "No, my mother loves me. She raised me. She is my mother." "I believe that love is real," Mrs. Beck said gently, "but love and truth are not always the same architecture." Zola's phone was stone in her hand as she picked it up. Her mother's contact photo looked back at her. Clarice Bennett, warm smile, gap tooth, the woman who did Zola's hair every Sunday morning until she left for Howard, who kept every academic award Zola had ever received in a box under her bed, who worked 17 nights of shifts to make sure her daughter wanted nothing she could prevent. The woman who might have purchased her. "I need to call home," Zola said. Her voice sounded like someone else's. "Not tonight," Mrs. Beck said gently, taking the phone from her hands with the authority of someone who has worked with people in crisis. "Tonight, you absorb this. Tomorrow, you decide what to do. But Zola," she cupped Zola's face, her expression fierce with tenderness. "Whatever the truth is, you are here. You survived it. You built a life that is extraordinary. That is yours. Nothing changes that." After Mrs. Beck left, Zola sat in the dark and let the pieces she had never examined loose from their positions. The absent hospital records, the way her mother always changed the subject with a particular efficiency, the 3-day panic over birth documentation for her graduate school application, the expression on her father's face in his last year, a guilt she had attributed to illness, to regret about time, to any of the 1,000 things a dying man might carry. Her phone buzzed. "Seo Jun." Mrs. Beck seemed concerned. "You okay?" She stared at the message. She could not begin to explain what she was not. "Fine," she typed. "Tired." She did not sleep. By the time the city outside began going pale with morning, Zola had made the only decision available to her. At 6:45, she called home. Her mother answered before the second ring, voice thick with sleep, and immediately alert in the way mothers become alert when their children call the wrong hour. "Zola, baby, it's early. Is everything okay?" "Mama, I need you to answer a question honestly." There was a pause. "Of course, sweetheart." "What hospital was I born?" Silence, long enough to be its own answer. "Zola, why are you—" "What hospital, Mama?" The silence that followed had a different texture. Then quietly, "Put me on with a minute." Rustling. Then her mother's voice again, fully awake now, and doing something complicated. "Who told you?" The words fell out of Zola's mouth as its own response. "So it's true?" "No, Zola, no, it's not what you—" "Then what is it? Tell me exactly what it is when you pay someone for a baby that was stolen from her mother." "We didn't know she was stolen," her mother said, and she was crying now, openly. "Zola, I had 3 miscarriages. 3. Your father and I wanted a child for so long, and there was a woman who said she could help us, a private facilitator. She said the mother was a young professional who couldn't keep the baby, that everything was arranged, legal, clean. She said the mother had signed everything." "How much did you pay her?" Zola asked. Her voice was a stranger's. $40,000. Her mother's voice broke entirely. "We didn't know, Zola."
We saw the news reports. Maybe you were 9. There was a story about cold case infant disappearances, and the Northwestern case was mentioned, and we recognized the date and the hospital, and we knew. We knew. And you said nothing. Zola stood at the window, the lake going gray below her. "For 9 years, you let me live a life that belonged to someone else?" "You were ours," her mother sobbed. "You are ours. We couldn't lose you." How does a person even begin to make that call? How do you look at your daughter and say,
You call them, Zola said. You tell the truth. You let the person decide what to do with it instead of deciding for them for their entire life. She hung up. She stood in the guest room of Seo Jun Lim's apartment, and she came apart completely, sitting on the floor against the bed because her legs had made their own decision. That was where Seo Jun found her 15 minutes later. She hadn't heard him get up. She didn't register his presence until he was already on the floor beside her, close and quiet, his back against the bed frame. "Mrs. Beck told me," he said. "I hope that's all right. She came to me because she was worried about you." Zola made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "My whole life is something that happened to someone else. My parents bought me. There is a woman somewhere who spent 18 years thinking her child was gone, and I've just been living my life completely unaware. I don't even know how to hold that." "No," he said, "you don't have to hold it. Not yet. Just get through the next few minutes. What if I want to fly back to Atlanta and pretend none of this happened?" "You could," he said it without drama, "but you won't. I don't know anything about me. I know you turned a stranger's car into an opportunity without hesitating for a second. I know you held your position through a dinner with my father while he tried to dismantle you. I know you called your mother at 6:45 in the morning because you would rather have a devastating truth than a comfortable lie." He looked at her steadily. "That is who you are, Zola. You don't run from things. I don't feel like that person right now. I feel like a person who has been made up." "Then let me help." He pulled out his phone. "Mrs. Beck found Diana Osei. She's a pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon in Washington. She has never stopped looking for you. She registered with every database. She funded a private search for years. She wants to speak with you if and when you're ready." Zola stared at the phone number on his screen, 11 digits standing between her and a woman who had spent 18 years with a daughter-shaped absence at the center of her life. What if she sees me and only finds what she lost? What if she sees you and finds what she's been searching for? The gentleness in his voice cracked something open in Zola's chest that she hadn't known was sealed. She had been cataloging his coldness so carefully that she had failed to notice when it had started becoming something else. "I cannot do this by myself," she admitted. "You are not doing it by yourself." He stood and offered his hand, and there was nothing transactional about the gesture. "Come on, let's get you some water, and then we'll do this together." "Why are you doing this? This isn't in our arrangement." He looked at her for a moment. "Maybe I'm finished only doing things that are in arrangements." He pulled her to her feet. "Maybe I want to be someone different from the person my father has been building for 30 years. He paused. "Or maybe," something shifted in his expression, something unguarded and genuine, "maybe I care about what happens to you." Before Zola could figure out what to do with that, his phone rang. He looked at the screen and closed his eyes briefly. "My father. He wants brunch. Both of us." "Seo Jun, I can't." "I'll tell him you're unwell. It'll be fine." "No." Zola straightened up, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "If I start disappearing now, I won't stop. I can do a few hours. I can hold it together that long. You don't have to pretend to be okay. Not here, not with me." "I'm not pretending to be okay. I'm pretending I'm about to come apart at the structural level." She managed something that was almost a smile. "There is a difference." He looked at her for a long moment, and what was in his expression made her breath move strangely. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I don't think I've ever met anyone with your particular quality of courage. You have clearly not met enough people." "I have met a very great number of people," he said it simply. "None of them have been you." The moment between them stretched long enough to become something. Then his phone rang again and broke it cleanly in half. "They should go," he said. "But Zola, when we get back, we're calling Diana Osei together. I'm not allowing you to face that alone." As they moved toward the door, Zola registered something that should have alarmed her, but instead settled somewhere in her chest, like a stone finding the bottom. This arrangement was no longer pretending to be something real. It was simply real, and she had no idea what to do about that. Brunch with Chairman Lim was its own kind of endurance. Zola sat through 3 courses and a series of questions she answered on autopilot, while the morning's revelation moved through her in waves she had to keep smoothing down beneath the surface. "Miss Bennett, you seem somewhere else today." He observed it the way he observed all things, neutrally and precisely. "Traveling always takes a day or two to settle. I apologize if I seem distracted." Seo Jun said calmly that she'd had a long week of conference sessions. Chairman Lim's eyes moved between them. "The reception is Saturday evening," he said. 800 guests. Press will be present. The family will be watching how you present together. I want to be certain you understand what that means." "Father," Seo Jun said, "you've made the parameters clear. I'm ensuring Miss Bennett understands them as well." Chairman Lim looked at her directly. "People in my world are very good at finding falseness. They've made careers of it." "I understand, sir," Zola said, meeting his gaze despite everything churning underneath. "I won't bring anything false to your event." Something moved in Chairman Lim's face that she couldn't entirely read. He turned back to Seo Jun. "She has more composure than I expected." He paused. "Perhaps your judgment is better than I've been crediting." After brunch, in the car back, Seo Jun drove in silence for several blocks before speaking. "Ready?" "As ready as I can be," she said. In the living room, afternoon light across the floor, Zola dialed the number Mrs. Beck had given her. Seo Jun sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, an anchor that kept her from simply floating away. The phone rang twice, 3 times. "Hello?" The voice was careful and hopeful in equal measure, guarding something enormous. "This is Zola Bennett," she said, her voice shaking. "Mrs. Beck gave me your number. She told me." There was a sound on the other end that was equal parts a sob and a gasp. "Zola? Oh God, is it you?" "I don't know yet," Zola said honestly. "Mrs. Beck thinks it might be, because of the birthmark." "The crescent moon," Diana said softly. "Left collarbone. I used to trace it while you slept. I told you it was a map that would always lead you somewhere good." Zola's hand went to her collarbone and pressed against the mark that had simply been hers her whole life. "Why didn't you find me?" Her voice broke on the question. 18 years. How did 18 years pass? "I never stopped looking," Diana said, and the fierceness in her voice reached through the phone like a hand. "Private investigators, every DNA database, television programs, advocacy organizations. I never filed a missing persons update without hope, Zola, never once. But whoever arranged your disappearance was methodical. They covered everything. What I know now is that the Washingtons paid a facilitator."
They said they didn't know you were taken. Do you believe them? Zola thought about her mother's hands doing her hair on Sunday mornings, her father reading to her every night until she was old enough to be embarrassed by it. A box under a bed full of every award she had ever earned. Love that was absolutely real and built entirely on someone else's tragedy. "I don't know what I believe yet," she said. "Then here is what I believe," Diana said, her voice steadying into something clear. "You survived. Whatever happened, you came through it and built something remarkable. The people who raised you loved you. That is true. And Zola, you are mine. You are my daughter. I have had an 18-year-long hole in the shape of you, and you are on the other end of this telephone. However long it takes, however carefully we have to do this, I am here." Zola broke. The sobs came from somewhere she hadn't known had depth. Seo Jun's arm came around her shoulders, and she leaned into him without thinking about it, because there was no thought left, only the weight of everything she had believed and the strange lightness of a truth finally spoken. They talked for an hour. Diana told her about the night she was born, the plans she had made, the name she had chosen and kept in a journal that she still kept in her nightstand. When they finally ended the call, Zola sat in the afternoon light feeling hollowed and somehow cleaner, like the truth had taken something from her and given something else back in its place. "You okay?" Sejun asked. He was still beside her. "No," she said, "but I think I know what okay looks like from here." She looked at him. "Thank you for staying." He looked back at her with an expression she didn't have a category for yet. "There is nowhere else I would have been," he said simply. She didn't have an answer for that. He stood, putting careful space between them. "The reception is in 4 days. If you need to withdraw, I understand. Everything you are handling right now is—" "No," Zola stood, her own certainty surprising her. "I made a commitment and I'm keeping it. Besides," she said honestly, "performing a relationship might be the most straightforward thing in my life right now." A real smile, genuine and unexpected on his face. "I'm not sure anything about this qualifies as straightforward. We're a perfect match then." The next 4 days built themselves into something she hadn't planned for. Each evening she video called Diana, beginning to lay brick by brick the foundation of a relationship between two strangers who shared a bloodline and 18 years of absence. She let her parents' calls go to voicemail, not ready to forgive, not ready to close the door either. The days she spent with Sejun, learning the language of him, the silences that meant he was working through something difficult, the specific way his mouth moved when something surprised him, the moments he forgot to be guarded and became simply himself. By the time the evening of the reception arrived, the touches that were supposed to be performance had weight. The glances held things neither of them had agreed to put there. The arrangement had become, in the space of 4 days, something neither of them had a clean word for. "You look extraordinary," Sejun said, when she came out in the deep green gown his assistant had selected, which fit like it had been made for her specifically. "You don't look like someone who's endured this week," Zola said, adjusting his tie. The warmth of him reached her fingers. Her pulse did something she noted and chose not to examine. "Ready to convince 800 people?" "About that." Sejun caught her hand, his expression serious in a different way from his usual serious. "What if we weren't performing?" Her heart stopped and then restarted. "What?" "I know the timing is impossible. I know you are carrying more right now than anyone should be asked to carry." He held her gaze steadily. "But Zola, these past 4 days, I haven't had to pretend, not for a single moment. I have been entirely myself with you, and I didn't notice it happening until it had already happened." "We barely know each other," she said. "I know you fall asleep reading your dissertation notes when you're trying to process something. I know you cook elaborate things at midnight when your mind won't rest. I know you are brave in a way that is completely specific to you, not the performance of bravery, but the actual thing." He brought her hand up, held it carefully. "Tell me I'm alone in this. Tell me I'm misreading it." She looked at him and understood that honesty had become the only language she had left in her. "You're not alone," she said. "It scares me, and I don't have any idea what to do with it, but you are not alone." His smile was the most unguarded thing she had ever seen on his face. "Then we're both frightened." "Yes," she searched his expression. "What do we do with that?" "We go to a reception," he said, "and we stop pretending it's not real." At the reception, moving through 800 people in a ballroom that overlooked the city, Zola and Sejun moved the way people move when they have stopped performing and started simply being. His hand at his back was real. When he introduced her to shareholders and family partners and people who examined her with professional precision, she felt him present beside her in a way that had nothing to do with strategy. Chairman Lim watched them all evening from various distances, his expression shifting through things she couldn't fully read. Late in the evening, he found her alone near the terrace doors. "A word, Miss Bennett." "Of course." They stepped outside into the cool air above the city. Chairman Lim was quiet for a long time, looking at the lights below. He turned to her. My wife died when Se-jun was 14. She was the only person who ever told me when I was wrong, the only one who made me want to be better than I was built to be. He paused. My son looks at you like I looked at her, like you are both the question and the answer at the same time. Zola said nothing. I investigated you, he said, thoroughly. I know about the Morrison case. I know about Diana Osei. I know what you are currently carrying and what it is costing you. He held up a hand when she started to speak. I am not offering judgment. I am offering observation. The observation is that despite everything happening in your life right now, you showed up here tonight. You stood beside my son with your complete self, and you asked for nothing from his family's position or resources to solve your own problems. That is the kind of character that doesn't come from a particular background. It comes from what a person has decided to be. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. He looked at her directly. If you hurt him, I have a very long memory and a great deal of patience. Despite everything, Zola almost smiled. Understood. And Chairman Lim, if he hurts me, I will have 2 mothers, a surgical specialist, and a very committed academic background to draw on. I believe I am well-resourced. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she had not seen him do once. He smiled. My son, he said quietly, has better instincts than I gave him credit for. 6 months later, Zola stood in a restaurant in Chicago, a neutral space she had chosen on purpose, and looked around the table at the gathering she had called together. Diana Osei sat across from her, composed and watchful. Clarice and Marcus Bennett sat to Zola's right, her mother's hands folded in her lap, her father's expression carefully still. Mrs. Beck sat beside Diana, a bridge between the pieces of this story. Se-jun sat beside Zola and said nothing and was entirely present. Thank you for coming, all of you. I know this is a great deal to ask, and I know there is no version of tonight that isn't difficult. She took a breath. I spent the last 6 months figuring out who I'm supposed to be now, whose daughter I am.
What story I actually belong to, and I finally understood that I was asking the wrong question entirely. She looked at Clarice and Marcus. You raised me. You loved me in ways that are real and specific and mine. You also made a choice that caused enormous harm to someone else, and you carried that secret for 18 years while I lived in the dark. Those things are both completely true. I am angry, I am hurt, and I cannot erase what you built with me because the foundation was wrong. Then she looked at Diana. You brought me into the world. You never gave up looking. You deserve to know me. You deserve to be part of my life. We are strangers building something from the beginning, and that is strange and hard and also something I want. I'm saying, Zola continued, that I have 2 mothers, and somehow we are all going to have to figure out what that looks like. It won't be clean, it probably won't always be comfortable, but it is the truth, and I am choosing to build on truth from now on. The dinner was not easy. Tears came from multiple directions. There were moments it felt like the whole thing might simply collapse under the weight of what it was asking, but it didn't collapse. Slowly and imperfectly, something new began to form in the space where the old false structure had been. Se-jun arrived at dessert, sliding into the chair beside Zola and taking her hand without announcement. How did it go? He murmured. Messy, she said quietly, but real. I'll wait as long as that takes, he said, and she knew he meant it. A year after getting into the wrong car at O'Hare, Zola Bennett stood in the apartment she and Se-jun had begun to share and looked at her own reflection. Her dissertation acknowledgments were printed and pinned above the desk. Photographs covered one section of wall. herself and Diana at a Chicago restaurant, still learning the shape of each other. Herself and her mother at a painful and necessary lunch that had lasted 4 hours and ended with both of them crying. Herself and Chairman Lim at Seo Jun's birthday dinner, the old man making a dry remark about her research that was, she had come to understand, his particular form of affection. Seo Jun appeared behind her in the mirror, his arms coming around her waist with the easy certainty of someone who had stopped performing and started simply staying. "Do you ever regret getting in my car?" He asked it quietly, genuinely, like he still needed to know. Zola thought about everything the question contained, the lies uncovered, the truths she had been brave enough to walk into, a mother found after 18 years, a love she hadn't been looking for and couldn't now imagine being without. "Not once," she said, turning in his arms. "Best wrong car I ever walked into." When he kissed her, Zola thought about the crescent moon on her collarbone, the mark that had always been simply hers, a map, Diana had told her, that would lead you somewhere good. She had not understood that at the time. Standing here now, in this life that had built itself out of a mistake in the rain, she thought that perhaps the moon had known exactly where it was pointing all along. The end. Thank you so much for being here with K-Afro Narratives for this story. If something in it moved you, if Zola's courage or her heart got into yours, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support is what makes it possible to keep telling stories like this one. Until next time, be brave enough to want the truth even when it costs you something. Choose the people who stay, and never underestimate the power of a wrong turn that leads you exactly where you were always supposed to be.